Let's talk about the role of two of the most prominent signings that the Texans made this offseason in free agency and how that could impact things on the field, how that's going to impact the coach overseeing the side of the ball on which they play on, and how it could impact the draft, which is this month. Damn it, we've made it. We are really, really close. It is the Locker Room, number one source for Texans daily digital content. I'm Landry Locker. You can hear me Monday through Friday, 10 to 2 Central on the Odyssey app and Sports Radio 610. I want to focus on Jimmie Ward and I want to focus on Dalton Schultz, their roles, how those roles could change, what the variables are, and how to look at this through the perspective of the draft. So we're going to look at Jimmie Ward first, who DeMeco Ryans obviously thinks a lot of. He knew him in San Francisco. Ward is battle tested. He's been through rebuilds. He's played in the Super Bowl. He was one of the top 100 players in the NFL 2 years ago. He plays nickel. He plays safety. It seems like he wants to play safety, and I think he's going to add an element that can't be measured based on production, and I also think his production is going to be tied to something else. We'll get into all that, but first, let's hear the guy who is going to be in charge of establishing the role for Jimmie Ward on the 2023 Texans. Let's hear from DeMeco Ryans, and I want you to listen to how DeMeco speaks about Jimmie Ward, and you can kind of tell just how much he admires Jimmie Ward's not only athleticism and talent, but how much he just seems to like the personality.
Of course, everyone knows Jimmie wants to play safety, but in talking to Jimmie last year, I always told him, like, when you play the nickel position and you can play the safety position, it just opens up a lot more avenues for you, and that's what it's done for Jimmie. And Jimmie he's been very fun to work with because he jumped into that nickel role and he thrived in the role, made probably more plays than he's made playing safety. So Jimmie he can play anywhere, but I'm going to play him at safety.
Thriving is an understatement. It was almost like a career revival, and he was matching up against some of the best receivers in the league. Jimmie Ward is going to add an element of nasty. He's going to add an element of mentorship to these young guys, specifically the guys going into their second year, whether it's Jalen Petrie, who he's going to line up next to, or Derek Stingley. He's going to provide something that few players can provide. It is going to be culture / leadership with substance, a guy who still has a little bit left in the tank. He knows when to joke around. He knows when to get serious. Now, the production and the overall effectiveness, it's going to really depend on how he meshes with Jalen Petrie. We've seen good safeties where they're good in one situation and all of a sudden they come together. Two guys who've had success, and it just doesn't work. They don't mesh because it's such a style thing. Sometimes this guy's close to the line of scrimmage. This guy's here. Sometimes the styles don't mesh. That's going to be on DeMeco Ryans to figure out what the role is going to be. I think Jalen Petrie has potential to thrive in this system. We've seen Jimmie Ward thrive in this system. So you've seen do it. One, you feel like his skills kind of translate to it. But how those two guys mesh is going to be really, really interesting. But the value of Jimmie Ward, it's about more than how those two guys mesh. It's about the leadership. It's about the experience. It's about the fact that he can put his hand on the shoulders of two of your young guys that you have high hopes for during the rebuild, Jalen Petrie and Derek Stingley, and he can mentor those guys and he can help them. I think from an on-field perspective, Jimmie Ward, at the very least, he's a big upgrade from what they had last year. How it works is really going to depend on how the styles mesh with him and Petrie and how DeMeco Ryans uses him. Also, Dalton Schultz. Dalton Schultz, high expectations for Dalton Schultz. Dalton Schultz, one of the 5 best receiving tight ends statistically in the league the last 3 years. The one thing that you do wonder, how much of that had to do with his chemistry with Dak Prescott. I tried to look into this last year when Cooper Rush was starting instead of Dak. Kind of hard and maybe a little bit not impossible, but there's too much of a gray area to really measure, because if you just look at the box scores and you look at the game logs, there was a 2-catch game, there was a 3-catch game, and then there were a couple games where he didn't have catches. But if you dig a little bit deeper, he actually had a knee injury, Dalton Schultz, and he actually missed the game against the Giants. So he was kind of banged up and recovering. So there's a lot of people who would just look at the box score and say, well, he had this many catches with Cooper Rush, and it's clear that he's not as good with Dak, which would make sense as the starting quarterback, but also he was dealing with a knee injury, so there is a variable there. But it will be interesting to see how he builds chemistry with the starting quarterback, how Dalton Schultz looks. You've seen guys leave certain situations and they just kind of fall off just because of the chemistry they have with the quarterback. Don't anticipate that. And regardless, I think the expectations for Dalton Schultz are tight end 1. And if there were a betting section in Las Vegas and there were a prop of players to lead the Texans in receptions, I think some of the money would be on Dalton Schultz. And our tight end can be a young quarterback's best friend. We anticipate a young quarterback. Dalton Schultz has high expectations, but let's hear from the man himself. Now, DeMeco's not going to be the one overseeing the offense, but DeMeco, he has the last couple of years, he's had to prepare for the Dallas Cowboys in playoff games, and I'm sure that 86 has been someone that he's looked at on tape and talked to his linebackers about and said, we got to shut this guy out. Here is DeMeco Ryans talking about Dalton Schultz.
I think Dalton has shown that he can make some plays in the passing game, in the vertical passing game, so I'm excited to add him. I think he's a tight end is very quarterback-friendly position, right? Easy completions. Dalton has done a really good job of expanding his game, becoming a better blocker as well. So I think all around we got a quality starting tight end in Dalton.
Now, when we start talking about the vertical and stuff like that with Dalton Schultz, I don't know that you want him to be your main vertical threat. And maybe I'm just taking it too literal with what DeMeco said, which wouldn't be the first time and won't be the last time that I've done that. But the Texans do need more vertical threats. The Cowboys, they needed more guys as vertical threats, and they had CeeDee Lamb and Michael Gallup last year and Dalton Schultz. So I'm hoping you're not relying on him to be your only vertical guy. Texans clearly need some help at wide receiver. They need more playmaking there. But Schultz, he's going to be the starting tight end. You anticipate that he's going to produce. Don't want him as your main vertical threat. And you want to see how he gels with the quarterback, whether it's Bryce Young, whether it's CJ Stroud, whoever it is. You would like to have some production from the tight end. But Dalton Schultz, pretty clear role. Jimmie Ward, variable. The one thing I do want to look at when it comes to these guys, and this is something that Nick Caserio is going to have to worry about. Like, when it comes to making guys work, DeMeco's going to make Jimmie work because he's overseeing the defense, whether he's calling it or not. Bobby Slowick, the offensive coordinator, he's going to have to figure it out with Dalton Schultz. But from Caserio's perspective, and I guess you can throw DeMeco in here, the draft impact is something else that I would want to look at. Now, you have hopes that both of these guys, Jimmie Ward and Dalton Schultz, are going to be starting caliber players. Now, how does that impact your draft strategy? For example, if we get to the second round, and let's say the Texans are on the clock at 33, sometimes the draft board and when players are selected, it just kind of shapes up to where maybe you weren't anticipating picking a guy at a certain position, but you just get an opportunity to where you can't really pass it up. So let's say that a safety doesn't go in the first round of this draft, which could very well happen. If Brian Branch and Antonio Johnson are on the board at 33, you like Jimmie Ward, you want him to be a safety. Are you gonna consider taking those guys? The tight ends, we anticipate a tight end run. Now, the good thing about tight ends is you can play multiple guys, and you only have a 2-year commitment to Jimmie Ward. You have a 1-year commitment to Dalton Schultz. If the tight ends shape up to where, I don't know, whether it's Washington out of Georgia, whether it's Kincaid, even if Mayer falls down there, do you consider grabbing another tight end if the board plays into your favor there? Like, does Jimmie Ward prevent you from drafting the top safety with the 33rd overall selection? Does Dalton Schultz prevent you from taking a tight end? Let's say you get to the third round and those guys fall even more because of position value or whatever. Is that going to stop you from taking these guys? It's something to really keep an eye on. There's not much of a commitment. We've talked a lot about the short-term contracts. We hope that Jimmie Ward and Dalton Schultz both ball out, but this is a long-term plan right now. You're in a rebuild. Would Nick Caserio pass up that opportunity? Only time will tell, but the month is here, and we are 24 days away from the draft, and at least we're talking about leadership, culture with substance with Jimmie Ward and Dalton Schultz. It's not the Rex Burkhead, Justin Britt type of veterans. You expect big things from them, but there are some variables and there are some things to keep an eye on, and it's a fun time to follow this squad. No matter what happens, whether Jimmie Ward balls, whether Dalton Schultz balls, whether other tight ends or safeties are drafted, just remember, when it comes to this Texans game, we are all in this together. Have a good Monday.